Now we've talked about your grandma, your aunt, and your mom. Could you tell us a bit more about you? Like how your friends see you, how you see yourself?
Yeah, well, that's a very good point, actually.
Mm.
I would say I'm quite a practical person.
Mm.
And it's really funny because, one time, I actually a few times at different points in time, I had friends telling me, that's a very practical way of looking at it. And I think maybe that is kind of them in a way describing how I am or how they perceive me.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of practicality, I think it kind of really shapes the way I think, the way I do things. And I really think about, okay, well, does this actually lead to something that's useful or practical? And I think in the way I approach my job, that is very much the case, right? Thinking about what can my research be used towards, whether that's can be used towards policy or has some sort of policy impact. Can it be used by the government for some kind of response or intervention?
About the transferability
Of that work, and also about how does that perhaps impact other people that are interested in similar work. Are they able to take away something from that? And even I think when I teach, right, I feel like I don't think maybe we don't talk about this enough, but even in the way I teach, I try to kind of let my students to also think about things more practically, right? And encourage them to think that, at the end of the day, we don't have to be an expert in something very, very specific. But it's more thinking about how will these skills and how will this knowledge benefit me in the future? Where would I see these skills become useful to myself? So I teach statistics for first year geography students at the university, and there are 200 students. Wow. And they all come from very different backgrounds and also varying levels of mathematics understanding. Some of them have taken GCSEs or A levels, or some of them probably just don't even remember the last time they've used the equation. So very, very diverse audience. And one of the things I try to do in my lectures and also in all the practices they do is to ensure that they understand why they're doing what they're doing and where those statistical knowledge can come into play. So it's less about, memorizing the equation, sitting there figuring out how do I solve this problem, but really thinking about, well, when will I use this method, right? Is this something I can use towards my dissertation? Is this something that I can use perhaps in the future if my boss asks me to do something? Where would I find these skills useful? And I think that's really, really reflected in my teaching philosophy, actually. But I think just personally, I'm a very practical person. Like I would pick, for example, if I meet a friend out for lunch, I would find a restaurant that's like somewhere close to us. And that's, good enough. Doesn't have to be, 5 stars all around, but, somewhere that's, I think, accessible, and as long as it has a decent seating and stuff, that's good for me. But I can see people thinking otherwise, or maybe going a bit out of the way to find something that they might want ideally. So yeah, so I would say that this is a really good term to describe how I would describe myself, but also how other people would describe me as well.
I agree with what your friends see as practical, and you think it's also because of this practicality that you have when both in your research and in your teaching. You see, this is also something you try to convey with this message. Like when you're learning statistics, it's not just about passing this course with certain scores, but thinking about the skills you have with statistics, how would it be useful in the future?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's like thinking less about what the actual problem is and thinking more about how to solve the problem. And once we know a general idea of how to solve it, all of this information will be available online, right? We can use assistants to help us out here, right? We don't have to memorize anything. And I think this is one of the ways I kind of get my students to think about more about the how and the why, and the less about, you have to use this and that to do that. So I would say, like, and I take into account that, at the end of the day, no one's going to come out as a mathematician. No one's going to come out, having expert knowledge in statistics. But if they can come out with some understanding of the methods we've used and have a decent understanding of how that can be applied to studying geography, I think that's good enough.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's also what we see in geography about this, right? When we use mathematics skills with the statistics, it's not about like we want to outcompete with mathematicians. It's about we see that we could use this to solve geographical problems or solve problems related that we could bring in geographical perspectives to related like social problems or like we're talking about with this global public health.
And I think that's probably a very practical way to see it, are these applications, right? So, and I think that's really I think we need practical people in the social sciences, because often I think some of the stuff can be very specific or very niche. And sometimes it's hard to understand how that might be applied into society at times. And I think being able to think creatively about the applications and how that might be useful, that will be really, really, in my opinion, I think that's probably the way we need to move in order to innovate. Bringing in past knowledge and combining that with current knowledge and at least a vision of what the future could look like. I think that's what we need to drive innovation forward. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Thank you.
I really like the word practicality with all this, because then it means like you actually care about the world, not just with, more papers are published. More papers published will actually have a better conversations with the communities. It's not about just about these so-called, when some people talk about practical, they could misunderstood that as a way just to calculate the least step to do that, instead of seeing when you were talking about, you were actually trying to make connections to more things.
Yeah, and I think ultimately I think we all would probably want this as well as academics, is being able to have some kind of impact, right? And creating the impact. And sometimes the impact comes, from being able to see how this is useful, how this could, contribute to something greater, how this can be used to build something or form something. And I think, if we can find ways to make that impact tangible, these are all, practical ways of seeing things.
I like the word practicality.
Thank you.